When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.
You're listening to The Drag.
This podcast contains strong language, references, and descriptions of domestic abuse, violence, and suicide. It also has graphic descriptions of gun violence in schools. Mental health is an important part of this story, so please take care while listening. On a hot Texas night in late July of 1966, two University of Texas students walked into the air-conditioned Paramount Theater. Jim Bryce and Sandra Wilson were friends who had met in a philosophy class. They had made plans to hang out before their school week started.
I said, Sandra, let's go to a movie. She said, okay. So we went to a movie at the Paramount downtown. We went to an evening movie. It was about, I guess it was an 8 o'clock movie.
I do remember we went to see a movie called The Russians Are Coming, or something like that.
It was the height of the Cold War, and the movie was a satire. When it ended, Jim and Sandra drove to Mount Bunnell. Despite having Mount in its name, it's basically a big hill that overlooks Austin. Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys or the Beatles' Paperback Writer might have played over the car's radio. The songs were two of the summer's biggest hits. They parked at the base of Mount Bunnell and climbed a long stairway to the lookout spot. At the top, they sat down and took in the view of Austin. From one spot on the hill, they could see the university's landmark 27-story tower. As Jim and Sandra talked about their summer classes, they made a plan to grab lunch the next day.
So we agreed to meet the next day, Monday, the 1st of August, at the Student Union.
A casual conversation between the college friends turned serious when they began talking about the police. Law enforcement had been in the news as much then as it is now. Back then, it was about tactics used to suppress anti-war and civil rights protests. Sandra was an activist and a member of Students for a Democratic Society, and she had strong opinions on this topic.
I wasn't a big fan of the police at the time.
I said, well, Sandra, I understand what you're saying, and there's no question in my mind there's a lot of problem with law enforcement. There's a lot of abuse. There are real problems. We've got situations where there are times when you need people that are trained and have the equipment and experience to handle the situations. And this is at about 10:45 on July the 31st, Sunday night, up at the top of Mount Bunnell. Sandra, what if somebody just sort of went crazy and started randomly shooting people?
I'm Sarah Kinney, and this is the first episode of Season 4 of Darkness. This season is about the 1966 University of Texas tower shooting. One man shot and killed 17 people and injured 30 more. It shocked the nation. Mass school shootings didn't happen back then, and this event was the beginning of a never-ending wave of horror. I went through shooting drills starting in elementary school. Now, I'm a student here at the University of Texas, and the possibility of a shooter on campus crosses my mind about once a week. I've seen so many reports of school shootings that took the lives of countless children, young adults, and faculty. While I was reporting for this podcast, a gunman opened fire at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. Uvalde is just over an hour from my family's home in San Antonio. It was just one of the 647 mass shootings in the U.S. in 2022. This is the story of gun violence in schools, a story that is now all too familiar to my generation. I want to focus on the stories of the victims as much as I can. However, I also want you to understand the gravity and nature of this tragedy. To do this, I'm going to explain some of the shooter's background in this episode. This is the only episode where I'll name him, and I'll tell you about his life only for context. This podcast series is going to be about the victims and their experiences. They are my top priority in telling this story. Let's go back to 1966 in Austin. While the two friends talked on Mount Bunnell, on the opposite side of the city, 25-year-old Charles Whitman arrived at his South Austin home. Whitman was a former Marine and was taking classes at the University of Texas as an architectural engineering student. He also worked on campus as a lab assistant. He had just dropped off his wife Kathy for her 6 p.m. shift downtown as a telephone operator. He sat down at his typewriter and wrote the following. We don't have audio of Whitman, so here is a voice actor reading what he wrote.
Sunday, July 31st, 1966, 6:45 p.m. It was after much thought that I decided to kill my wife, Kathy, tonight after I pick her up from work at the telephone company. I love her dearly, and she has been as fine a wife to me as any man could ever hope to have. I cannot rationally pinpoint any specific reason for doing this. At this time, though, the prominent reason in my mind is that I truly do not consider this world worth living in, and am prepared to die, and I do not want to leave her to suffer alone in it.
Some friends showed up at the door around 7:30. The visitors later told police Whitman was in a jovial mood and was typing a letter on his coffee table. But the visitors didn't see what he had written. After they left, Whitman returned to typing until the phone rang. On the line was one of Kathy's friends looking for her. He said his wife would be getting off her shift soon. At 9:30 p.m., Whitman picked up Kathy in his 1966 black Chevrolet Impala. The couple headed to their home in a tight-knit neighborhood just south of downtown Austin. Kathy had just finished her first year as a science teacher at a local junior high school. She planned to return in the fall. That summer, she picked up extra shifts as a telephone operator to help with bills while Whitman returned to college. Kathy was from the small southeast Texas town of Needville. She met Whitman in February of 1962 while they both attended the University of Texas. They married 6 months later, and August of 1966 would mark their 4-year wedding anniversary. About a year after they met, Whitman lost a military scholarship. Due to poor grades in the spring of 1963, he had to leave the university and return to active duty in the Marines. Kathy continued her enrollment at the university and graduated with a degree in science education while he served in the Marines. Throughout their relationship, Whitman was abusive to Kathy. Whitman himself told a psychiatrist in March of 1966 that he hit Kathy on 2 separate occasions. He clearly had anger issues and also found himself in trouble with the Marines. He was court-martialed for loaning money with high interest rates. As a penalty, the Marines dropped his rank and discharged him. He returned to the University of Texas soon after, hoping to finish his architectural engineering degree. That brings us back to that night in July of 1966. Whitman had just returned home with Kathy. Once inside, he called his 43-year-old mother, Margaret. Over the phone, he asked her if he and Kathy could come over to cool off in her air-conditioned apartment before going to bed. Margaret had moved to Austin earlier that year with Whitman's help. She had also recently left her husband. Her husband, who was Whitman's father, had been a successful plumber in Florida, but he had long been abusive to her and their 3 sons. The move to Austin gave Margaret a chance to start a new chapter of her life. Now that she was closer to her son, Margaret would often have Kathy and Whitman over at her new apartment just west of the Texas Capitol building. That night, Whitman made the 10-minute drive alone to his mother's apartment while Kathy stayed home. Margaret came down to greet her son and introduced him to the security guards around 12:15 a.m. They then walked to her apartment, room 505. The details of what happened next are unclear. Here's what we do know. After Margaret and Whitman entered her apartment, her son immediately attacked her. Police would later find her body in her bed under a floral blanket. She had a stab wound on her left side and an injury to the back of her head. Blood on the floor indicated Whitman had killed her elsewhere in the apartment, then moved his mother to the bed. Police said Margaret died from a gunshot wound, but it's not 100% clear. There was no autopsy, and no one heard a gunshot. A neighbor did later report hearing what they thought was a child whimpering or crying in the mother's apartment around the time Whitman arrived. While at the apartment, Whitman wrote another letter, this time handwriting it on a yellow steno pad.
Monday, August 1st, 1966, 12:30 a.m. I have just taken my mother's life. I am very upset over having done it. However, I feel that if there is a heaven, she is definitely there now. The intense hatred I feel for my father is beyond description. My mother gave that man the 25 best years of her life, and because she finally took enough of his beatings, humiliation, and degradation and tribulations that I am sure no one but she and he will ever know, to leave him. He has chosen to treat her like a slut that you would bed down with, accept her favors, and then throw a pittance in return. I am truly sorry that this is the only way I could see to relieve her suffering, but I think it was best. Let there be no doubt in your mind, I love that woman with all my heart.
He folded the letter and placed it next to his mother's body before pulling the duvet just below her chin. As he left, he placed another note he had written on the door. He signed it with his mother's name. The note read,
I don't have to be to work today, and I was up late last night. I would like to get some rest. Please do not disturb me. Thank you, Mrs. Whitman.
Despite leaving, Whitman returned to the apartment shortly after. At 11:45 a.m., an apartment guard let Whitman back in under the pretense of refilling his mother's prescription. The guard noticed the note taped to the door. Whitman entered her apartment and left moments later to drive back to his home in South Austin. At their home, his wife Kathy was asleep in bed. He entered the bedroom and stabbed his wife at least 5 times in the chest. As blood pooled around her on the sheets, he returned to his typed note on the coffee table, adding in cursive at the bottom of the page.
August 1st, 1966. Monday, 3 a.m., both dead. I imagine it appears that I brutally kill both of my loved ones.
His note went on. He cited his abusive father as the reason he killed his wife and mother. The remainder of the letter reads like a will and suicide note. Their dog was to be given to his in-laws. He wanted to give his money to an unnamed mental health foundation to prevent what he called
further tragedies of this type.
Police would not find the bodies of Kathy and Margaret until that afternoon.
At Baker's, we know the minute a tomato is picked off the vine, the fresh timer starts. The sooner we get our produce to you, the fresher it is. That's why we've completely overhauled our process to shorten the time from harvest to home for our tomatoes, strawberries, and salads. Because we know how much you love fresh produce, we give you more time to enjoy your tasty fruits and veggies at home. So whether you're shopping in-store, picking up, or prefer delivery, we're committed to bringing you the freshest produce possible. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
The sun rose over Austin the morning of August 1st, 1966. The city had no idea what would be unleashed that day. Just a 10-minute drive from where Whitman had killed Kathy, students at the University of Texas prepared for another Monday of summer school.
Typical summer in Austin. You went all year long, and then you died to go to the summer school. It was so much fun. I mean, you took 2 courses, you had plenty of time, and it was a party.
That's Bob Higley, who was a student here at the University of Texas in 1966. He remembers summers in Austin as pretty similar to today's.
It was hot, typical August, and on August 1st, it was an extremely hot day. So you had a typical August day in Texas, in Austin. Sultry. We would put out warnings today, be careful if you aren't comfortable or haven't been out in the heat a lot, you could suffer heat stroke. We'd have those warnings out. In that day and age, you just knew, stay inside, stay in the air conditioning. It was slow.
Today, the university is surrounded by a metro area of over 2 million people. Skyscrapers look out over what was once open fields. 1960s Austin had just over 200,000 people. It was a segregated southern city with a mostly white student body. Vietnam protests were becoming commonplace, especially on campus, but the students still found ways to have fun.
You'd find some place to raft up, a cold beer and a bunch of people, and you went to an apartment complex that had a swimming pool and changed in the car and went to their swimming pool and drank there. It was a kick.
However, life wasn't always a party for Bob. He worked for the student body president, Cliff Drummond.
I was Cliff Drummond's factotum. You understand factotum? Fetch and carry. My fraternity had assigned me to be his aide de camp. That is a general's gopher.
Cliff had plenty of little tasks and meetings for Bob to attend in his place.
He makes sure the generals' uniforms are pressed, shoes are shined, memos are no misspelling. He takes care of the general. He goes where the general tells him to go. And he anticipates what is needed. So an aide-de-camp has a big job. You get to sleep 4 hours a night if you're lucky.
After he finished the work, he would report back to Cliff, which is what he planned to do that sweltering Monday at lunch. Across town at Austin Rental Service, Whitman put his plans into motion. He rented a 2-wheel dolly at 7:15 a.m. Then he drove to a local hardware store to buy a .30 caliber carbine rifle around 9 a.m. He also bought 2 extra gun clips along with 8 boxes of ammunition, all in cash. He told the salesman he was going to hunt wild hogs in Florida. Whitman's father had passed down a fascination with guns to his son at a young age. While serving in the Marines, Whitman's shooting skills earned him a sharpshooter badge. As Whitman shopped that morning, University of Texas student and Longhorn Band member Forrest Preece was headed to lunch with friends after their early classes had ended.
I had a standing date to meet 2 of my old Longhorn Band pals there at 11:20 that worked for schedule for all of us. And the 3 of us would sit down and order our hamburgers and Cokes and solve the problems of the world, like 20-year-old guys do, It was my job to be the timekeeper. The way we sat in that booth every day, the 3 of us, I'm the one that had a view of the clock on the wall behind the soda fountain. So when the big hand hit the 9, it's my job to say, okay, time to go. All right.
Forrest met his friends at the Rexall drugstore just off campus. The company's blue and orange sign joined many others marking shops and restaurants on Guadalupe Street. The street is often referred to by University of Texas students as the Drag, and it remains in Austin today, but the drugstore has since been replaced by many other stores over the years. A small boutique now fills the building where the drugstore used to be. Back on campus, morning classes continued.
It was summer school, so not as many people were around as during the fall and spring. So it was in the summer, it was kind of more of a relaxed atmosphere.
But the academic pressure was still on for Brenda Bell, a student at the time. She wasn't too confident heading to the center of campus as her Shakespeare class was just starting.
So that day, as a matter of fact, because I knew we were going to have a pop quiz, and I was walking across the mall as the bell was ringing, so I wound up being a little bit late. I almost skipped that class because I knew I wasn't prepared for the quiz, but then I thought, well, it's summer, I'll make it up down the line.
As students filed into their classes on campus, Whitman made another stop, this time at Sears. At 9:40 a.m., he checked out with a 12-gauge automatic shotgun before driving home, where he packed a gun case. Here's everything he had in that case. It's a really long list, but it shows the depth of his planning. He packed the following items: a radio, an alarm clock, a notebook and pen, a water canteen, a jug of water, a jug of gasoline, a lighter, matches, a can of charcoal starter, the receipt from the hardware store, 4 C batteries, several strips of rope, clothesline, electric wire, 2 rolls of tape, a compass, a hatchet, a machete and its sheath, a hammer, an ammunition box, gun cleaning equipment, 2 rifle scabbards, 2 hunting knives in their sheaths, a pocket knife, a pipe wrench, his glasses, 14 cans of food, a jar of honey, bread, a set of earplugs, a flashlight, a foot-long steel bar, a duffel bag, a deer hunting bag, and an extension cord. Now dressed in gray coveralls, he also threw matching gloves into the container. He sawed the stock and barrel off his newly bought shotgun. This was just one of 7 guns he packed. He also had 3 pistols and 3 rifles, one of which had a scope designed for long-distance shooting. Corresponding ammunition was added to the case, and 4 more of his guns were left at home. He also packed an additional backpack with the following: gun clips, another pair of gloves, binoculars, sunglasses, toilet paper, soap, a second pocket knife, a can opener, and a shaving razor. He piled everything into his Impala, covering the gun case with a quilt. He started his car and drove to campus.
When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.
About a mile from the university, KTBC News Director Neil Spels worked that morning to sort the day's headlines for his upcoming broadcast. Meanwhile, his predecessor Paul Bolton was on the mic.
The day was normal. It was just starting out to be a hot day. It's a Monday, fairly routine, nothing abnormal in terms of news for the weekend. I remember coming into work and just being prepared for another Monday in the summertime in Austin, Texas, and complaining about the heat and stuff like that. Didn't have to complain about traffic then, back in that day. But it was a routine day. Paul Bolton, who was the he was semi-retired. He was the news director before me, and he went into semi-retirement when I took over. But he would come in the early morning to do his standard morning radio show, which was a folksy radio program.
Neil graduated from the University of Texas in 1958. In 1966, he was 30 years old and worked for KTBC, a local television and radio station owned by President Lyndon B. Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird. Back then, reporters traveled in the station's iconic Red Rover cars. Red Rovers were basically station wagons plastered with KTBC branding.
So as we were building the day, getting ready for the noon news, I was concerned about the reporters getting out and covering the stories that we had scheduled to be covered that day, which, by the way, not a single story that I'd prepared to be covered that day was covered at all.
On the edge of campus, a traffic officer stopped a man driving an Impala. All vehicles trying to enter campus had to go past these checkpoints. The officer talked to the driver, who said he was an engineering lab assistant and had a university ID card to prove it. The officer issued him a parking permit and let him on campus around 11:30 a.m. It only took minutes for the man to arrive at the university's 27-story tower. Since he looked like a janitor or repairman in his coveralls, people didn't question the metal container on the dolly as he rolled past. Whitman entered the tower. Sandra and Jim, the two students who visited Mount Bonnell the night before, headed separately toward the student union for lunch. Jim told Sandra he would meet her inside the union. His algebra class had ended early, so he got to the union sooner than when they planned to meet up.
I went by and got my mail and walked into the south door of the student union building, sat down, started watching TV. It was soap operas, waiting for the news going to come on at noon.
Sandra didn't have classes that morning.
And I like to sleep late, so I think I slept till like around 11:30, and then I must have gotten up to I lived at a place called College House, and got up to take a shower, and then I got ready and went down.
Remember the Longhorn band member Forrest? He had met up with friends at the drugstore on the drag. The drugstore served food, and they were finishing up lunch around the time Sandra and Jim were supposed to meet at the union. Forrest normally kept an eye on the drugstore clock, but lunch that day ran a bit longer than usual.
We got into some kind of discussion or argument, or it wasn't really an argument. We never really argued. We didn't get into heated discussions about things, but we were all a bunch of little know-it-all blabbermouths. We were always running our mouths. But anyway, I didn't notice the clock until the big hand was on the 10. As 10 till, we're like, oh, guys, we're late. Man, we better get up and go.
As Forrest and his friends went to pay for the food, Whitman arrived at the top of the tower. He had taken his dolly up by elevator and then dragged it up some stairs. He eventually reached the lobby of the tower's observation deck, which was a popular tourist spot in Austin back then. A wraparound balcony was just beyond the room's glass-paned door. Out there, visitors could see the entirety of Austin. The Spanish tile roofs of surrounding university buildings, apartment complexes, shops on the drag, downtown office buildings, and greenery sprawling into the horizon. But instead of the view, Whitman focused on the receptionist inside the observation deck's lobby. 51-year-old Edna Townsley worked at the lobby's desk. Edna often greeted visitors with a warm welcome. That Monday, she was filling in for a coworker's shift and was just about to get off for lunch. Except for the reception desk, a couch, and some chairs were the only other things in the room. Whitman entered the lobby, approached Edna, and hit her above her left eye with an unknown object, breaking her skull. She lost consciousness, and Whitman dragged her behind the couch. He opened the gun case he had brought with him on the dolly. Students Cheryl Botts and Donald Walden were checking out the view on the observation deck before Whitman had arrived. They opened the door and walked into the reception area about 10 minutes before noon. Donald said hello as they walked past Whitman. Donald later said he assumed the man, now holding 2 rifles, was there to hunt pigeons. Cheryl noticed a dark streak on the linoleum floor and warned Donald not to step in it. They didn't realize it was the receptionist Edna's blood. Edna would later be found behind the couch with a gunshot wound to the left side of her head. Once Donald and Cheryl had left, Whitman was alone in the lobby. He began to use the furniture to barricade the doorframe, dividing the lobby from the stairwell to the floors below. After Cheryl and Donald went down the elevator, a family visiting from Texarkana rode up. The Gabors had brought their 2 sons, who were 16 and 19 years old, to visit family in Austin. The boys' aunt and uncle lived in the city and invited them to see the tower before the family left for San Antonio. The group headed toward the lobby, with the boys out in front. The wives followed, while the husbands trailed behind. When the boys reached the lobby door, they found a desk blocking the entrance with chairs piled on top of it. They peeked around the barricade of furniture. Then the oldest brother, Mike, tried to push past the stacked furniture, but Whitman opened fire from the other side of the doorway. Mike was hit on his shoulder, chest, and head. His younger brother also took shots to his head. Behind them, their mother, Mary Frances, was struck on her head and torso, damaging her kidneys and spine. Her sister-in-law was also shot in the chest. Mike and his mom were blown back by the hit and tumbled down the stairs. Mary Frances would later write in her book, The Impossible Tree, that she never heard a sound from her youngest son or her sister-in-law. So she said she assumed they were all right. However, the two are believed to have died on impact. The husbands, who were farther down the stairs, walked up shortly after to find the rest of their family members on the ground. They began to pull them away from the barricade, moving them to a lower platform between flights of stairs. They tried to move the oldest son, Mike, but he refused as it hurt his shoulder when they lifted him. The gunshots had paralyzed his left side, so he couldn't walk on his own. Mike's father and uncle left, saying they would go find help. According to Mary Frances's book, Mike began saying, quote, all the bad things he could think of. In response, she scolded him. Mike realized his mother was alive and tried to get her to talk and stay conscious. While the Gabors fought for their lives in the stairwell of the tower, Whitman continued his plans on the other side of the barricade. He walked through the glass door onto the observation deck, leaning his dolly against the door now behind him. Unloading his case, he propped up his rifles, one by one, pointing each at different sections of campus. Looking through his scope, he pointed the rifle down the front of the tower. Next time on Season 4 of Darkness.
There's just been a gunshot on the main plaza outside the main building, and at least one person wounded. Still shooting. It sounds like rifle shots.
So my first thought was it was electrocution, because it just feels like this huge jolt. You know, I didn't really feel pain. And so I started falling, and then it felt like I was melting into the concrete.
But I did notice, as you know, the chimes go off every 15 minutes. And I kept thinking, every 15 minutes? I kept thinking that every 15 minutes, that's another quarter hour that she'd been laying out there under the sun. She was shot, laying on hot concrete.
I wanted to give you a clear narrative of August 1st, 1966. In order to do that, I can't tell you the name and story of every victim and survivor of this tragedy within the main part of the episode. At times, the many names can be confusing, and at other times, there just isn't enough information about them. However, they all deserve respect and recognition, so I'd like to go over them now and some of what we do know here. Mark Gabor was the younger brother who was killed in the tower. He was a high school student. Mike Gabor was the older brother injured in the tower. He was visiting his family during his time off from the Air Force Academy. He and his family planned to go to San Antonio to visit his friend after seeing the tower. Mary Frances Gabor was the mother injured in the tower. She was 41 years old at the time and had 2 sons and a daughter. Marguerite Lamport was the aunt who hosted the Gabor family in Austin. She was 56 years old and originally from Texarkana. Edna Townsley was the 51-year-old lobby receptionist. She had worked for the university for 12 years and had 2 sons. This season of Darkness is reported, written, and hosted by me, Sarah Kinney. Heather Stewart is this season's producer, sound designer, and editor. Katie Penchikautka and Robert Quigley are the executive producers. This podcast is presented by the Drag Audio Production House, which is part of Texas Student Media at the University of Texas at Austin's Moody College of Communication. The associate producers are Jade Emerson, Liv Gamble, Cameron Greiser, Mackenzie Matwick, Ashley Miznazi, Marissa Green, MJ Tilton, Guido Palufo, Liam Quigley, Aurora Berry, and Jeannie Sanchez. The cover art was created by Alexa Georgelos. Sophia Vargas Karam is the drag's marketing and communications manager. Thank you to the Austin History Center, Neil Spels, and the LBJ Presidential Library for help with the archival audio tapes. Special thanks to the University of Texas School of Journalism and Media and Texas Student Media. Also to Jay Bernhardt, Rachel Davis Mercy, David Reif, and Gerald Johnson. A huge thanks to Leslie Schrock for all her support and guidance. The Drag is a non-profit educational organization that is made possible by individual donations. Please support our work by going to thedragaudio.com/donate. Every dollar goes directly to producing more content like this, while giving students an amazing educational experience. Thank you.
Bed Bath & Beyond is back with more to choose from than ever before. At the new Bed Bath & Beyond, you'll find all the products and brands you love, along with a huge new selection of furniture, decor, and everything else you need to create the home of your dreams. All in one amazing online store. Download our new app and save even more with exclusive deals and offers. Plus, get free shipping right to your front door. Welcome to a bigger, better Beyond.
When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.